Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Michael Williams. I had just turned 34 when we arrived at Badlands National Park in South Dakota. And it was the worst mistake of our lives. Sarah and I had been planning this RV trip for months. After 5 years of marriage and 2 years of trying unsuccessfully to have children, we needed time away from the fertility clinics, the disappointed faces, the well-meaning relatives asking when we'd give them grandchildren. The gleaming 30-foot Winnebago sitting in our driveway represented escape from Chicago's suffocating suburbs, from our jobs, from the weight of expectations that had been crushing us both. "It'll be perfect," Sarah had said, running her hands along the RV's pristine white exterior. "Just you, me, and the open road. No schedules, no appointments, no one asking us anything." She looked beautiful that morning we left, her auburn hair catching the September sunlight as she double-checked our supplies. At 32, Sarah still had the laugh that made me fall in love with her in college, but lately it had become forced, mechanical. The doctor's visits had drained something essential from her, leaving behind a woman who smiled too quickly and cried when she thought I wasn't looking. Our first stop was supposed to be a simple overnight at a campground near Badlands National Park. We'd found it online, Echo Valley RV Resort, advertised as a pristine wilderness experience, with full hookups and stunning views. The website showed families gathered around campfires, children roasting marshmallows, couples walking hand-in-hand along wooded trails. The reality was different. We arrived at Echo Valley just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Badlands formations in shades of rust and gold. The entrance was marked by a weathered wooden sign, its paint peeling like sunburned skin. Below the campground's name, someone had carved additional words in crude letters. "Turn back." "Probably some teenager trying to be funny," Sarah said, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty. The road into the campground was unpaved, winding through increasingly dense stands of juniper and pine that blocked out much of the remaining daylight. Our RV bounced and swayed over ruts and rocks, the refrigerator contents rattling ominously behind us. "Are you sure this is right?" Sarah asked, studying the GPS on her phone. The screen showed only gray. No roads, no satellite imagery, just a blank space where our location should have been. "Has to be," I replied, though doubt was creeping in. The reservation confirmation said, "Site 47. We'll find it." The campground appeared suddenly, a cleared area surrounded by towering pines. About 20 RV sites were scattered throughout the space, connected by dirt roads that formed a rough circle. Most of the sites were empty, which surprised me given that we were visiting during peak fall camping season. Only 3 other RVs were visible. An ancient Airstream that looked like it hadn't moved in years, a massive Class A motorhome with its windows covered by dark curtains, and a small travel trailer with Oregon plates. The camp office was a tiny log cabin near the entrance, its windows dark. A hand-painted sign hung crooked on the door. "If nobody's here, pick any open site, pay in the morning, cash only." Kind of informal, Sarah observed. Site 47 was at the far end of the loop, backing up to the tree line. As I maneuvered our RV into position, I noticed something odd. The trees behind our site formed an almost perfect semicircle, as if they'd been planted that way. The effect was unsettling, like being watched by a gallery of silent spectators. We spent the next hour getting set up, extending the slide-outs, connecting to the electrical hookup, running our water hose to the spigot. The routine activities were comforting, familiar. For the first time in months, Sarah seemed genuinely relaxed. "This is nice," she said, settling into one of our camping chairs with a glass of wine. "Listen to how quiet it is." She was right. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a loon from some unseen lake. No traffic, no sirens, no sounds of civilization at all. As darkness fell, we built a small campfire in the metal ring provided at our site. The flames danced hypnotically, casting shifting shadows on the surrounding trees. Sarah moved her chair closer to mine, and for a moment, we were just a couple enjoying the wilderness together. "Mike," she said quietly, "I want you to know that even if the doctors are right, I'm glad it's you. I'm glad we're doing this together." I reached for her hand. "Sarah." "Shh." She squeezed my fingers. "Let me finish. I know I've been difficult lately. All the tests, the procedures, the disappointment every month. I lost myself somewhere in all of that. But sitting here, I remember who we used to be, who we could be again." I was about to respond when we heard it, a sound that made both of us freeze. From somewhere in the darkness beyond our fire, a child was crying. Not the angry wail of a toddler having a tantrum, but the heartbroken sobbing of a child who was lost, frightened, alone. "Jesus," Sarah whispered, standing up. "There's a kid out there." The crying continued, seeming to come from the forest behind our sight. It was raw, desperate, pulling at something primal in both of us. "Hello," I called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The crying stopped instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, pregnant with watching eyes. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We have to find them. What if they're hurt?" Before I could stop her, she was walking toward the tree line, following the beam of her flashlight. I grabbed our largest flashlight and hurried after her. "Sarah, wait. We don't know." It was a child, Mike. A little kid crying in the dark. We pushed through the first line of trees, our flashlight beams swinging back and forth across the forest floor. The trees here were old-growth pines, their trunks massive and their canopy so thick it blocked out the stars. The air smelled of decomposing leaves and something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. "Hello?" Sarah called. "We're here to help. Are you lost?" No response. We walked deeper into the woods, the sounds of our footsteps muffled by thick layers of pine needles. After about 50 yards, Sarah stopped. "Look at this," she said, pointing her flashlight at the base of a large pine. Carved into the bark, about 4 feet from the ground, were symbols. Not letters or numbers, but strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move in the wavering flashlight beam. Below the symbols, someone had scratched words in English. "Don't listen to her. That's fresh," I said, running my finger along the cuts in the bark. Sap was still oozing from the wounds. Sarah moved her light to the next tree, then the next. Each one bore similar carvings, symbols and warnings, all at about the same height, all recently made. "Mike, I want to go back." I was about to agree when we heard it again, the crying. But this time it was coming from a different direction, deeper in the forest, and there was something wrong with the sound, something that made my skin crawl. "That's not a child," I said. Sarah's face had gone pale in the flashlight glow. "What do you mean?" "Listen to it. Really listen." The crying continued, and as we stood there in the darkness, I began to pick out the wrongness. The rhythm was too regular, like a recording on loop. The timbre was off. Too deep in some places, too high in others, as if someone was trying to imitate a child's cry without quite getting it right. And underneath it all, barely audible, was something else. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing that definitely didn't belong to a child. "We're leaving," I said, grabbing Sarah's hand. "Now." We hurried back toward our campsite, our flashlights bobbing frantically as we pushed through branches and stumbled over roots. Behind us, the crying followed, moving through the trees parallel to our path. Whatever was making that sound was keeping pace with us, staying just out of sight in the darkness. We broke through the tree line and ran to our RV, not stopping until we were inside with the door locked behind us. Sarah was shaking, her face streaked with tears. I hadn't realized she'd been crying. "What was that?" she whispered. I looked out our window toward the forest. The crying had stopped, but I could see something moving between the trees. A pale shape that seemed to flow rather than walk, there one moment and gone the next. "I don't know," I said, "but we're not staying here. It's almost midnight, Mike. We can't drive these roads in the dark." She was right. The winding, unpaved road we'd taken to reach the campground would be treacherous at night, especially pulling our car behind the RV. We'd have to wait until morning. I double-checked all the locks, closed all the blinds, and turned on every light in the RV. Sarah made tea with hands that still trembled slightly, and we sat at our small dinette table, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. Maybe it was an animal, she said. Something injured, crying out in pain. Did that sound like an animal to you? No, she admitted. But what else could it be? I didn't have an answer. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea and listening to the night sounds outside. Around 1 a.m., we heard footsteps circling our RV. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped every few feet, as if someone was examining our vehicle from every angle. "Should we look?" Sarah whispered. I shook my head. Whatever's out there, it wants us to look. That's why it's making noise. The footsteps continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped. We waited, barely breathing, but heard nothing more. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and we managed to fall asleep in our bed at the back of the RV. I woke to Sarah shaking me gently. Daylight was filtering through the bedroom blinds, and the forest sounds had returned. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, normal sounds that made the previous night seem like a shared nightmare. "Coffee's ready," she said, "and I think I figured out what we heard last night." She led me to the front of the RV and pointed out the windshield. About 30 yards away, near the travel trailer with Oregon plates, a woman was walking a small dog. She looked to be in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and wearing hiking clothes. "I'll bet she's got kids or grandkids," Sarah said. "Probably one of them was having a bad night, missing home. You know how sound carries in the woods?" It was a rational explanation, and in the morning light I wanted to believe it. But as I watched the woman with her dog, something nagged at me. The dog was acting strangely, pulling away from certain areas, whining and struggling against its leash. "Let's pack up and get out of here," I said. Sarah looked disappointed. "I thought we could stay another night. I slept better than I have in months." "After what happened last night." "What did happen, Mike? We heard some sounds in the woods and got spooked. That's all." I stared at her. "You saw those symbols carved in the trees. You heard that thing following us." "I heard something. Could have been anything." She was using her reasonable voice, the one she employed when she thought I was overreacting. "Look, we drove 8 hours to get here. The least we can do is enjoy it for more than 12 hours. I wanted to argue, but looking at her face, more relaxed than I'd seen it in months, I couldn't bring myself to force the issue. Maybe she was right. Maybe we'd let our imaginations run wild in the darkness. "Okay," I said, "one more night. But if anything strange happens, anything at all, we leave first thing in the morning." Sarah smiled and kissed my cheek. "Deal. Now come on, let's explore a little. I want to check out those trails the website mentioned." We spent the morning hiking a well-marked trail that wound through the forest surrounding the campground. In daylight, the woods seemed less threatening. We saw deer, rabbits, and a variety of birds. The trees that had seemed so ominous the night before were simply large pines doing what large pines do, growing toward the light. Around noon, we encountered the woman with the dog coming back from her walk. She was older than I'd thought, maybe 70s, with weathered skin and pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through us. "Beautiful morning," Sarah called out cheerfully. The woman stopped, her dog sitting obediently at her feet. "You folks new to Echo Valley?" "Just passing through," I said, "staying in the Winnebago over at Site 47. Something shifted in the woman's expression. 47? That's not a good site." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. The woman glanced around as if checking to make sure we weren't overheard. "Strange things happen back there. Sounds in the night, things moving in the trees. You might want to consider moving to a different site." "What kind of sounds?" I pressed. "Children crying. But there ain't no children in those woods. Hasn't been for years. Not since—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Since what?" Sarah asked. "Since the Hendricks family. They had Site 47. Oh, must be 15 years ago now. Had a little girl with them, maybe 6 years old. Sweet little thing, always laughing and playing. One night she went missing. Search and rescue looked for weeks, but they never found so much as a scrap of clothing." My stomach clenched. What do you think happened to her?" The woman's pale eyes fixed on mine. "I think something in those woods took her, and I think it's still there, using her voice to call to others." She tugged on her dog's leash and started to walk away, then stopped and looked back at us. "If you hear crying tonight, don't go looking. Don't listen, and whatever you do, don't let it inside." She hurried away, her dog trotting beside her, leaving Sarah and me standing on the trail in stunned silence. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. "You don't think—" "I think that woman's been living in the woods too long," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. We returned to our RV in subdued silence. Sarah made lunch while I checked our systems and topped off our fresh water tank. The mundane activities helped restore some sense of normalcy, but I couldn't shake the memory of the old woman's pale eyes and the certainty in her voice. The afternoon passed peacefully. We read, played cards, and Sarah worked on a crossword puzzle while I cleaned our mountain bikes. Around 4 o'clock, the couple from the massive Class A motorhome walked by with their dog, a friendly golden retriever that bounded over to greet us. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" the man said. He looked to be in his 50s with graying hair and the healthy tan of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. His wife was younger, maybe mid-40s, with short blonde hair and a warm smile. "I'm Jim, this is Karen," he said. "We've been coming here for years. It's one of our favorite places." "Mike and Sarah," I replied. "This is our first time here. How long have you been coming to Echo Valley?" "Oh, about 10 years now," Karen said. "We discovered it by accident, and it's been our little secret ever since. So peaceful, so private. Have you ever experienced anything unusual here?" Sarah asked. Jim and Karen exchanged a quick glance. "What kind of unusual?" Jim asked carefully. "Sounds at night, things moving in the woods." "Ah," Karen said with a knowing smile. "You must have talked to Betty. She's the woman in the Airstream trailer. Been here longer than anyone, and she's got some wild stories. Don't let her spook you. Every campground has its local legends." "So you've never heard anything strange?" I pressed. "The woods make all kinds of sounds at night," Jim said. "Wind in the trees, animals moving around. Your imagination can turn any of that into something scary if you let it." They chatted for a few more minutes about RVing and travel plans, then continued their walk. Their casual dismissal of our concerns was reassuring, but something in their demeanor bothered me. They'd been too quick to explain away our questions, too eager to blame Betty for filling our heads with nonsense. As evening approached, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. Every shadow seemed to hide something watching us. Every sound from the forest made me look toward the tree line. Sarah noticed my nervousness and tried to lighten the mood by suggesting we cook steaks on our outdoor grill. "Come on," she said. "Let's have a nice dinner, maybe some wine. We're on vacation, remember?" I agreed, hoping the routine of cooking would settle my nerves. As I fired up the grill, I noticed that the other campers had all gone inside their RVs. No evening fires, no outdoor activities. The campground, which should have been coming alive as darkness approached, felt abandoned. We ate dinner as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The steaks were perfect, and the wine helped me relax. For a while, it felt like a normal camping experience. Then the temperature dropped. It happened suddenly, the warm September evening turning cold enough that our breath began to mist. Sarah wrapped herself in a blanket while I checked the weather on my phone. "That's weird," I said. "The forecast still shows 65 degrees. The cold continued to intensify until we were forced to retreat inside the RV. I cranked up our propane furnace, but the chill seemed to seep through the walls, settling into our bones. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, her teeth chattering. "This isn't natural." As if summoned by her words, the crying began. It started softly, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but gradually grew louder and more distinct. A child's voice, heartbroken and desperate, calling out in the darkness beyond our sight. "Help me," the voice pleaded. "I'm lost. Please help me." Sarah moved toward the door, her face etched with concern. "We have to." "No." I grabbed her arm. "Remember what Betty said. Don't listen." But the voice was compelling. tugging at every parental instinct we possessed. The crying became more urgent, more heartbreaking. "Mommy? Daddy? Where are you? I'm scared." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "It's just a little girl, Mike. She's terrified and alone." "It's not a little girl," I said, though my own resolve was weakening. The voice sounded so real, so genuinely distressed. The crying moved closer, circling our RV. Sometimes it seemed to come from right outside our door, other times from the forest behind us. And with it came other sounds. Footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of a child's gait, branches breaking under something much heavier than a 6-year-old. "Please," the voice called, now directly outside our bedroom window. "I just want to go home. Can you help me find my mommy?" I pulled the bedroom blind aside and looked out. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was a little girl in a white nightgown. She was pale, almost luminous in the darkness, with long dark hair that hung around her face. She was holding her arms out toward our RV, her mouth open in a wail of despair. "Sarah," I whispered, "come look at this." Sarah joined me at the window, and we both stared at the figure in the trees. "Oh my God," she breathed. "She's real. She's actually there." The girl seemed to sense our attention. She turned toward our window, and I got my first clear look at her face. It was wrong. Horribly, impossibly wrong. The features were those of a child. Small nose, round cheeks, wide eyes, but they were arranged incorrectly, as if someone had tried to reconstruct a face from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. The eyes were too large, the mouth too wide, the whole face somehow inverted, like a photographic negative of humanity. And when she smiled, a grotesque parody of childish innocence, I could see that her teeth were not the small, neat teeth of a 6-year-old, but the yellowed, pointed fangs of a predator. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, stumbling backward from the window. Sarah was still staring, transfixed. "She's beautiful," she said in a dreamy voice. "Look how sad she is. We have to help her." "Sarah, no. Look at her face. Really look." But when I turned back to the window, the thing had changed. Now it appeared exactly as Sarah described, a normal, frightened child with tears streaming down her face. She was reaching toward our window with small, delicate hands. "Let me in," she called, her voice muffled by the glass. "Please, I'm so cold." Sarah moved toward the RV's door. "I'm going to bring her inside." I grabbed her wrist. "No. Whatever that thing is, it's not human. What are you talking about? Can't you see she's just a little girl?" I looked back at the window. To me, the creature still appeared as I'd first seen it. A horrific mockery of childhood with impossible features and predatory teeth. But Sarah was seeing something entirely different. "Sarah, listen to me. That thing is not what it appears to be. It's showing you what you want to see." She struggled against my grip. "You're hurting me, Mike. Let go." The thing outside began to scratch at our window with its fingernails, the sound like chalk on a blackboard. Its crying had turned to singing, a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize, but with a melody that seemed familiar, as if I'd heard it in dreams. "Mommy," it called in Sarah's voice, perfect in every inflection and tone. "Mommy, please let me in. I'm your little girl." Sarah gasped and went limp in my arms. "Mike, did you hear that? She called me Mommy." The thing was using our deepest wound against us, exploiting the loss we'd never acknowledged, the child we'd never had, and it was working. Despite everything I'd seen, part of me wanted to believe it was real, wanted to open the door and gather this lost child into our arms. "She needs us," Sarah whispered. "We could take care of her. We could be a family." I forced myself to look directly at the creature. Its false face had dropped completely now, revealing something that had never been human. The skin was translucent, showing the dark veins beneath. Its eyes were black pits that seemed to contain depths impossible in any earthly skull. When it opened its mouth to sing, I could see rows of teeth extending back into its throat like a shark's. But Sarah couldn't see any of that. To her, it was still a lost child in need of rescue. The scratching at the window grew more insistent. Hair-thin cracks began to appear in the glass. "It's going to break in," I said. "Good," Sarah replied. "Then she can come inside where it's warm." I realized that Sarah was lost to me, completely under the thing's influence. I had to act alone. I grabbed the largest knife from our kitchen drawer and moved toward the door. If that thing was going to get inside, it would have to go through me first. But as I reached for the door handle, the scratching stopped. The singing faded away. Through the cracked window, I watched the creature melt back into the forest, its pale form becoming one with the mist that was rising from the ground. "Where did she go?" Sarah asked, pressing her face to the window. "We have to find her. She's all alone out there." "She's gone, Sarah. Whatever it was, it's gone." "What do you mean, whatever it was?" "It was a little girl who needed our help and you wouldn't let me save her." Sarah's voice was angry now, accusatory. "How could you be so cruel?" I looked at my wife and saw a stranger. The thing had gotten to her, planted something in her mind that was making her see what it wanted her to see, believe what it wanted her to believe. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That was not a child. It was something else, something that wanted to get inside our RV. You need to fight whatever it did to you." She stared at me with disgust. "I don't know what's wrong with you, Mike. You're acting crazy." I spent the rest of the night sitting by the door with the knife in my hands, watching Sarah sleep restlessly on our bed. She mumbled in her dreams, having conversations with someone I couldn't hear, reaching out to embrace empty air. Around 4 a.m., she woke up screaming. "She's hurt!" she cried, bolting upright. "I can hear her calling. She fell down a well or something. We have to help her." I listened carefully but heard nothing. "Sarah, there's no one out there." "How can you not hear that? She's screaming for help." Sarah jumped up and ran to the door. I intercepted her, and we struggled briefly before I managed to pin her arms to her sides. "Let me go," she shrieked. "She's dying out there, and you won't let me save her." She fought against me with surprising strength, clawing at my face and trying to bite my hands. This wasn't my wife. The gentle, compassionate woman I'd married would never hurt me deliberately. Whatever that thing had done to her was changing her, turning her into something else. "Sarah, please, you have to fight this." She stopped struggling and looked up at me with eyes that were no longer entirely human. They were too dark, too deep, reflecting light in a way that human eyes don't. "Why won't you let me have this?" she whispered. "We've wanted a child for so long. She wants to be our daughter. She wants to come home with us. Because it's not real, Sarah. It's not human." "Neither are we," she said, and smiled with teeth that seemed sharper than I remembered. I released her and stepped back, my heart pounding. The thing hadn't just influenced Sarah, it had begun to change her, to make her into something like itself. "Sarah, look at me. Really look. Do you see me? Do you remember who I am?" For a moment, confusion flickered across her features. "Mike, what's happening to me? I feel so strange. Something got into your head last night. Something that wants us to think it's a lost child. You have to fight it." She blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. I remember hearing a little girl crying. She was so sad, so alone. I wanted to help her. I know, but it wasn't real. It was something else, something dangerous. Sarah sat down heavily on our bed, holding her head in her hands. My thoughts feel muddy, like there's someone else in here with me, whispering things. What kind of things? That we should stay here, that this could be our home, that the little girl could be our daughter if we just let her in. She looked up at me with her own eyes, frightened and confused, but human again. "Mike, I think I'm losing my mind." "No, you're not. Something is trying to take control of you, but you're fighting it. That's good. Keep fighting." I helped her to her feet and began throwing our belongings into bags. "We're leaving, right now. It's still dark. I don't care. We'll drive slow, but we're getting out of here before that thing comes back." It took us 20 minutes to secure everything and disconnect from the campground utilities. As I started the engine, I noticed that the other RVs were still dark and silent. No one had emerged to see what all the commotion was about. "Mike," Sarah said quietly as we began to move, "look at the airstream." I glanced over at Betty's trailer and felt my blood turn to ice. The door was standing wide open, revealing only darkness inside. But there, in the doorway, was a pale figure in a white nightgown. The thing that had terrorized us all night was standing in Betty's RV, watching us leave. As we drove past, it raised one small hand and waved goodbye. We drove through the night in tense silence, both of us afraid to voice what we'd seen. The unpaved road seemed longer than I remembered, winding endlessly through the dark forest. Several times I thought we were lost, that the road was somehow changing direction or looping back on itself. But eventually, we reached the highway and the blessed sight of normal civilization. Gas stations, restaurants, places with lights and people and the comforting hum of human activity. We didn't stop until we'd put 300 miles between us and Echo Valley. At a truck stop outside Rapid City, we sat in a 24-hour diner drinking coffee and trying to process what had happened. Sarah looked haggard, her face pale and her hand shaking slightly as she held her cup. "I can still hear it sometimes," she said quietly. "The little girl's voice, calling for me. It's fainter now, but it's still there. It'll fade," I said, hoping I was right. "What do you think it was?" I'd been wrestling with that question all night. I don't know. Something that feeds on longing, maybe. Something that knew exactly what we wanted most and used it against us. Why couldn't you see what I saw? Why did it look different to you? Maybe because I wasn't the target. It wanted you, Sarah. It wanted to replace something in you, to fill the empty space where our child should have been. She started to cry then. Not the quiet tears she'd shed over our fertility struggles, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her core. "I wanted it to be real," she whispered. "Even knowing something was wrong, I wanted that little girl to be real. What does that make me?" "Human," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It makes you human." We drove home to Chicago in daylight, taking main highways and stopping frequently at populated places. The RV that had represented freedom and adventure now felt like a prison on wheels, tainted by what we'd experienced. We sold it 2 weeks later and never spoke of buying another one. Sarah recovered gradually. The voice she'd heard faded over the following days, replaced by her own thoughts and feelings. But she was changed by the experience, made fragile in ways that hadn't existed before. She started therapy, ostensibly to deal with our fertility issues. But I knew she was really trying to understand what had happened to her in those woods. I did some research of my own. Echo Valley RV Resort, it turned out, didn't exist. The website we'd found was a fake, created by parties unknown for purposes I could only guess at. The campground itself wasn't on any official maps or in any state databases. The nearest real campground was 30 miles away and had no record of our reservation. I found mentions of the place in online forums, cryptic references to the valley where the lost children call, and warnings to stay away from any campground that offered sites in the 40s. But no official acknowledgement, no investigation by authorities, no missing persons reports that mentioned the area. I tried to find Betty, the old woman who'd warned us. I called every RV park in South Dakota, described her and her Airstream trailer. No one had heard of her. Jim and Karen, the couple who dismissed our concerns so casually, were equally untraceable. The only concrete evidence of our experience was the crack in our RV's bedroom window, a spider web of damage that started from a single point where something had scratched the glass with impossible persistence. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would wake up gasping, claiming she'd heard the crying again. I would hold her until the shaking stopped, whispering reassurances that we were safe, that it was just a dream. But I knew better. I knew that some part of that thing had followed us home, embedding itself in Sarah's mind like a splinter that could never be fully removed. We never had children. Not because we couldn't, but because Sarah was terrified of what might answer if we called out into that particular darkness. She was convinced that the thing in the woods was still listening, still waiting for another chance to offer us what we thought we wanted. I understood her fear, because sometimes, in my darkest moments, I found myself wondering what would have happened if we'd opened that door, if we'd let the creature inside. Would it have given us the child we'd longed for? Would it have been worth the price we'd have paid? These are the thoughts that wake me in the middle of the night, covered in cold sweat and fighting the urge to drive back to South Dakota to find that nameless road that leads to Echo Valley. Not because I believe the creature's promises, but because I need to know what became of the others. Betty, Jim, and Karen. All the people who'd seemed so normal, so human, until you looked closely at their eyes. I think about the little girl who disappeared 15 years ago. The Hendricks daughter who was never found. I wonder if she's still there, still calling out in the darkness, still trying to lead others into whatever trap claimed her so long ago. Most of all, I think about the choice we made that night, to run rather than stay, to preserve ourselves rather than risk everything for the possibility of finally having the family we'd dreamed of. I tell myself it was the right choice, the only choice that made sense. But in my darkest moments, when Sarah is sleeping beside me and the house is quiet except for the settling sounds that all old houses make, I hear something else. A child's voice, faint but unmistakable, calling out from somewhere far away. "Daddy," it whispers. "Come back for me, Daddy. I'm still waiting. And God help me. Some nights I want to answer." That was 3 years ago. Sarah and I are divorced now, not because we stopped loving each other, but because we couldn't escape what Echo Valley had done to us. She remarried last year, a kind man who doesn't ask about the shadows under her eyes or why she refuses to go camping. I'm happy for her, genuinely. She deserves peace. I live alone now in a small apartment downtown, surrounded by the constant noise and light of the city. I chose this place deliberately. No quiet moments, no darkness, no spaces where unwelcome voices might whisper. But even here, especially on nights when the wind howls between the buildings, I sometimes hear it calling. 3 months ago, I started dreaming about the campground again. Not nightmares exactly, but strange, vivid dreams where I'm driving the RV back down that nameless road, back to Site 47. In these dreams, the forest is different, welcoming, almost. The trees part like curtains revealing pathways lined with soft light. And at the end of the trail, there's a house. A perfect little house with yellow paint and white shutters, flower boxes in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Sarah is there, looking as she did on our wedding day, radiant and laughing. And beside her stands a little girl with Sarah's auburn hair and my green eyes. She runs toward me with arms outstretched, calling, "Daddy, Daddy," in a voice like silver bells. In the dreams, we're a family. Complete. Happy. Everything we'd ever wanted made real. I wake from these dreams with tears on my face and a longing so deep it feels like drowning. Last week, I did something I swore I'd never do. I got in my car and drove to South Dakota. Not to Echo Valley, I'm not that far gone yet, but to the area around the Badlands, hoping to find some record of what we'd experienced, some official acknowledgement that the place existed. I spoke to park rangers, local historians, even a few indigenous elders who knew the old stories about the region. Most had never heard of Echo Valley, but one old Lakota man, maybe 80 years old, got a strange look in his eyes when I described what we'd seen. "White folks' words for it," he said, shaking his head. "But we got our own name for that place. Wanagi Otahedon, the place where ghosts dance. Been forbidden ground for longer than anyone remembers." "What's there?" I asked. "Hunger," he said simply. "Something that's been hungry for so long it forgot what it used to be. It takes the shape of what you miss most, what you lost or never had. Shows you perfect happiness, perfect love, but it's all hollow inside, empty as a gourd. Have others found it? Other people like us?" His weathered face grew sad. "Every few years someone comes asking the same questions you're asking. Most I never see again. But a few come back changed, marked. They got that look in their eyes like they seen something they can't unsee, something they want more than their next breath." He studied my face carefully. "You got that look, son. You thinking about going back?" It wasn't a question. "I dream about it," I admitted. "About what might have been if we'd stayed. Dreams are just dreams until you start believing them more than the waking world. That thing in the valley, it plants seeds in your mind, lets them grow until they crowd out everything else. Eventually, you can't tell the difference between what's real and what it's showing you. But what if—" I stopped myself, horrified by what I'd been about to say. "What if it's telling the truth?" the old man finished. "What if it really could give you what you want?" I nodded, ashamed of my desperation. "Maybe it could," he said. "Maybe it could make you into a perfect little family, give you all the love and happiness you think you need. But you wouldn't be you anymore. You'd be its puppets, its toys, playing out the same scene over and over for its entertainment. And eventually, you'd be used to call others, to bring fresh meat to the trap." He leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into mine. "That little girl you heard crying? She was real once. Had parents who loved her. A life full of possibilities. Now she's just bait on a hook, forever calling out in the darkness for someone to come save her." I left South Dakota that day, but I couldn't leave behind what he'd told me. The dreams got worse, more frequent. I'd wake to find myself dressed and holding my car keys, having no memory of getting out of bed. Twice I caught myself researching RV rentals online, looking at maps of South Dakota, planning routes that would take me back to that unnamed road. I knew I was losing the battle against whatever the creature had planted in my mind. The rational part of me understood what was happening, but the desperate, grieving part, the part that had never gotten over our inability to have children, was winning. That's when I decided to write this all down. Not as therapy, not as catharsis, but as a warning. Because I know now that I'm going back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The pull is too strong, the promise too tempting. In my weakest moments, I tell myself that maybe the old man was wrong. Maybe the creature really could give us what we'd lost. But I know better. I know that if I go back to Echo Valley, I won't be coming home. Whatever returns wearing my face, carrying my memories, won't be me. It'll be something else, something hungry and hollow, designed to lure others into the same trap. If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. You'll probably find this account in my apartment, along with the rental agreement for the RV I picked up this morning. Sarah's address is in my phone. Please call her, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that what happened to us wasn't her fault, that the thing in the valley chose us because of what we'd lost, not because of any weakness on our part. And if you ever find yourself on a back road in South Dakota, looking for a place to camp for the night, and you see a sign for Echo Valley RV Resort, keep driving. Don't stop, don't investigate, don't let curiosity overcome common sense. Some places are hungry. Some things that wear the faces of children aren't children at all. And some dreams are nightmares disguised as everything you've ever wanted. I can hear her calling now, even here in my apartment with the traffic noise and the neighbor's television and all the sounds of normal life. She's calling for her daddy, and God help me, I want to answer. The RV is parked outside. The tank is full. The GPS, though I suspect I won't need it, shows the route to South Dakota highlighted in blue. Sarah, if you ever read this, know that I loved you. Know that every choice we made together was the right one, even the choice to run. Know that what's about to happen isn't your fault or mine. It's just the price of wanting something so badly that you'll follow any voice that promises to give it to you. To anyone else who might find this, learn from our mistake. Some losses can't be replaced, some wounds can't be healed, and some doors should never be opened no matter how sweetly the voices on the other side are calling. The sun is setting now. Time to go. Time to see if the little girl in the white nightgown is still waiting for her daddy to come home. Found among the personal effects of Michael Williams, age 37, reported missing while traveling in South Dakota, October 2024. Mr. Williams' rented RV was discovered abandoned on a remote forest road approximately 30 miles southwest of the Badlands. Despite extensive searches by local and federal authorities, no trace of Mr. Williams has been found. The GPS unit in his vehicle showed his final destination as Echo Valley RV Resort, though no such establishment exists in any official records. The investigation remains open. I never believed in the stories they told about Mirror Lake in the Uinta Mountains of Utah, until what happened to me out there. My name is Jennifer Williams. I'm 29 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The plan had been simple enough. 4 days of RV camping with my older sister Amanda and her husband Derek, at one of Utah's most remote and beautiful lakes. Amanda had been planning this trip for months, ever since Derek bought their massive 38-foot Fleetwood Discovery. She'd studied maps, made reservations, even bought matching outdoor gear for all of us like we were some kind of expedition team. "It'll be perfect, Jenny," she'd said over dinner at their suburban Salt Lake City home. "Just the three of us, no cell service, no distractions, quality family time." Amanda had always been the planner, the organizer, the one who turned simple ideas into elaborate productions. At 34, she was everything I wasn't. Married, successful in her marketing career, owner of a beautiful home with Derek, a software engineer who worshipped the ground she walked on. They'd been trying to have children for 3 years, and I suspected this trip was her way of dealing with another failed IVF cycle. I'd agreed to come partly because I felt sorry for her, and partly because my own life was such a mess that 4 days in the mountains seemed like a reasonable escape. My boyfriend of 2 years had recently moved out, taking half my furniture and all of my confidence with him. My freelance graphic design work was barely paying the bills. At 29, I felt like I was watching everyone else's life move forward while mine remained stuck in some kind of perpetual adolescence. We left Salt Lake City on a Thursday morning in early October, the RV loaded with enough supplies for a month rather than a weekend. Derek drove while Amanda navigated, and I sat in the passenger area, watching Utah's landscape shift from urban sprawl to high desert to forested mountains. The Uinta Mountains rose around us like ancient sentinels, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Mirror Lake sat at nearly 10,000 feet elevation, accessible only by a winding mountain road that was closed from November through May. We'd be among the last campers of the season. "Look at this," Amanda said, consulting her iPad as we climbed into the high country. Mirror Lake gets its name because the water is supposed to be so still and clear that it creates perfect reflections. Native Americans considered it a sacred place, a portal between worlds. Portal to what? I asked. The spirit world, according to the legends. They believed the lake could show you things that weren't quite real, weren't quite not real, like looking into another dimension. Derek laughed from the driver's seat. "Sounds like tourist board marketing to me. Next, you'll be telling us about Bigfoot sightings." But Amanda was reading more. Actually, there have been some strange reports over the years. People seeing things in the water that weren't there when they looked directly. Campers reporting that their reflections moved independently. A few disappearances that were never explained. "Disappearances?" I said. "Nothing recent, mostly from the 1970s and 80s. Probably just people getting lost in the wilderness, but the locals tell stories about the lake calling people into its depths." Derek caught my eye in the rearview mirror and rolled his eyes. Amanda had always been fascinated by ghost stories and local legends, collecting them like other people collected souvenirs. The road to Mirror Lake was a series of switchbacks that climbed through dense stands of aspen and pine. As we gained elevation, the air grew thin and cold, and patches of snow appeared in the shadows between trees. The RV's engine labored with the altitude, and Derek had to downshift frequently to maintain our speed. After 3 hours of driving, we crested a final ridge, and Mirror Lake spread out below us like a sheet of polished obsidian. It was larger than I'd expected, maybe half a mile across, surrounded by towering peaks that reflected perfectly in its still surface. The effect was disorienting. It was impossible to tell where the mountains ended and their reflections began. "Wow," I breathed. "It really is like a mirror." The campground consisted of about 20 sites scattered around the lake's eastern shore. Most were empty, which wasn't surprising given the late season and weekday timing. Only 3 other RVs were visible: a small Airstream near the boat ramp, a mid-sized Class C motorhome, and an older fifth-wheel trailer that looked like it had seen better days. Our reserved site was at the far end of the campground, backing up to the water's edge. As Derek maneuvered the RV into position, I got my first close look at the lake. The water was so clear I could see the bottom 20 feet out, where it dropped off into depths that looked infinite. Fish moved lazily in the shallows, their movements creating the only ripples on the otherwise perfect surface. "This is incredible," Amanda said, stepping out of the RV and breathing deeply. Can you smell that air? So clean, so pure. I had to admit the setting was spectacular. The afternoon sun painted the surrounding peaks in shades of gold and amber, and the silence was profound. No traffic, no machinery, just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the gentle lap of water against the shore. We spent the rest of the day setting up camp and exploring the immediate area. Derek extended the RV's slide-outs and awning while Amanda and I arranged our outdoor furniture and started a fire in the provided ring. The routine activities were soothing, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. As evening approached, the other campers remained invisible. No lights appeared in the other RVs, no sounds of conversation or activity. It was as if we had the entire lake to ourselves. Maybe the others already left, Amanda suggested as we cooked dinner on the outdoor grill. A lot of people just stopped for one night on their way to somewhere else. Derek was less convinced. I saw movement in that airstream earlier. Someone's definitely in there. We ate dinner as the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reflected perfectly in the lake's surface. The temperature dropped quickly after dark, and we retreated inside the RV to play cards and share a bottle of wine Amanda had brought. "This is nice," she said, dealing another hand of poker. "When was the last time we all just sat and talked without checking our phones?" She was right. Without cell service, we were forced to actually engage with each other, and I was reminded why I'd always enjoyed spending time with my sister, despite our differences. Derek proved to be funnier than I'd given him credit for, telling stories from his software development work that had us all laughing. Around 10 o'clock, I stepped outside to use the bathroom facilities at the other end of the campground. The night was crystalline clear, with more stars visible than I'd ever seen from the city. The lake reflected the starlight like scattered diamonds, creating the illusion of walking through space itself. The bathroom building was a simple concrete structure with solar-powered lights that cast everything in an eerie blue glow. As I walked back toward our RV, I noticed something odd. The airstream that Derek had mentioned was completely dark, but there was someone standing beside it, silhouetted against the starlight. The figure was tall and thin, wearing what looked like a long coat or dress. It stood perfectly still, facing the lake, and even from a distance of 100 yards, I could feel its attention focused on the water with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I hurried back to our RV, not wanting to encounter a stranger in the darkness, but when I looked back from our sight, the figure was gone. "Everything okay?" Amanda asked when I came inside. "Fine," I said, deciding not to mention the figure. "Just cold out there." We stayed up until midnight playing cards and talking. Eventually, Derek announced he was going to bed, and Amanda followed him to the RV's rear bedroom. I settled onto the convertible dinette that served as my bed, pulling the thick comforter up to my chin. I was nearly asleep when I heard it, a sound like someone calling my name. "Jenny." The voice was soft, barely audible over the RV's heater, but unmistakably clear. It seemed to come from outside, from the direction of the lake. I lay still, listening intently. For several minutes there was only silence. Then I heard it again. "Jenny, come outside." The voice was female with a quality I couldn't quite identify. It was familiar somehow, like someone I'd known long ago but couldn't place. And it was compelling, tugging at something deep in my chest that made me want to respond. I got up and moved to the window that faced the lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the star-filled sky so clearly that it looked like I could fall upward into infinity. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, about 50 feet from shore, I spotted a ripple moving across the surface. As I watched, the ripple resolved into a wake, as if something was swimming just beneath the surface. It moved in a slow circle, creating expanding rings that caught the starlight. And from somewhere in the darkness, the voice called again. "Jenny, don't you want to see?" I found myself reaching for the door handle before I caught myself. What was I doing? Why did I suddenly have such a strong urge to go outside, to walk down to the water's edge in the middle of the night? I forced myself to step back from the window and return to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every few minutes I heard the voice calling, sometimes my name, sometimes just wordless sounds that might have been singing. And each time, The urge to go outside grew stronger. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and made myself a cup of tea. As I sat at the dinette, sipping the warm liquid and trying to calm my nerves, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The lake was no longer reflecting the stars. I pressed my face to the window, sure I must be seeing things wrong. But no, the water's surface had turned completely black, as if it had become a pool of oil or ink. The perfect mirror that had captivated us all day was gone, replaced by something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And in that darkness, shapes were moving. They were vague, undefined, like shadows swimming through shadow. Sometimes they looked human, sometimes animal, sometimes like nothing I could identify. They moved with purpose, circling beneath the surface, occasionally breaking through to create ripples that spread outward in perfect concentric rings. Jenny. The voice was closer now, coming from just outside our RV. I crept to the door and peered through the small window. There, standing at the water's edge not 20 feet away, was a woman. She had long dark hair that hung past her shoulders, and she was wearing a white dress that seemed to glow with its own light. Her back was to me, but something about her posture, the way she held her head, was achingly familiar. As I watched, she turned slightly, giving me a partial view of her profile. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother. My mother, who had drowned in a boating accident when I was 12 years old. My mother, who had been dead for 17 years. "Jenny," she said, and it was definitely her voice with the same gentle cadence I remembered from childhood bedtime stories. "Come down to the water, sweetheart. I have something to show you." I stumbled backward from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't possible. I was dreaming, or having some kind of altitude-induced hallucination. My mother was dead. I'd been to her funeral, had visited her grave dozens of times, but when I looked out the window again, she was still there, now facing our RV directly. Even in the darkness, I could see her face clearly. The same warm brown eyes, the same gentle smile, the same laugh lines around her mouth. She looked exactly as she had on the day she died, not aged a single day. She raised her hand and beckoned to me. "Don't be afraid," she said. "I've been waiting for you for so long. Come to me." My hand was on the door handle before I realized I was moving. The need to go to her was overwhelming, a physical pull that seemed to bypass my rational mind entirely. She was my mother. She was calling for me. How could I not respond? I was turning the handle when a hand grabbed my wrist. "Jenny, what are you doing?" It was Amanda, standing behind me in her pajamas, her face creased with sleep and confusion. "She's out there," I whispered. "Mom is out there." Amanda followed my gaze toward the lake, but when I looked back, the figure was gone. The water had returned to its mirror-like state, perfectly reflecting the stars as if nothing had happened. "There's no one there, Jenny. You were dreaming. I wasn't asleep. I saw her. She was calling my name." Amanda put her arm around my shoulders and guided me back to the dinette. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. The breakup with Marcus, the financial problems, moving back in with Dad. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're exhausted." I wanted to argue, to insist on what I'd seen, but doubt was already creeping in. The figure by the lake seemed like something from a dream now. Too perfect, too impossible to be real. Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I was just projecting my grief and loneliness onto the unfamiliar environment. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you back to bed. Things will look different in the morning." But I couldn't sleep. I lay on the converted dinette, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the night. Several times I thought I heard the voice calling, but it was fainter now, as if coming from a great distance. And once, around dawn, I could have sworn I heard my mother singing the lullaby she used to sing to me as a child. I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Derek was already up, cooking breakfast on the outdoor grill while Amanda sat in a camping chair with her iPad reading. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said cheerfully. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," I lied, not wanting to rehash the previous night's events in daylight. "Derek wants to take the kayaks out this morning. The lake's supposed to be perfect for paddling. No motorboats allowed, so it stays really peaceful." Derek had brought 2 inflatable kayaks, which he was already setting up on the shore. The morning was crystalline clear, with the lake surface like glass and the surrounding peaks reflected so perfectly it was hard to tell which way was up. "You should come with us," Amanda continued. "When's the last time you were out on the water?" The answer was not since our mother died, but I didn't say that. Instead, I helped them carry the kayaks to the water's edge and watched as Derek demonstrated the paddle strokes. "It's easy," he said. "Just dip and pull, dip and pull. The lake's really calm, so you don't have to worry about waves or currents." Amanda went first, pushing off from the shore and gliding smoothly across the mirror-like surface. She looked natural on the water, confident and graceful. Derek followed, and soon they were 50 yards from shore, their kayaks creating the only ripples on the lake's perfect surface. "Come on, Jenny," Amanda called. "The water's incredible." I pushed the 3rd kayak into the shallows and climbed in carefully. The moment I settled into the seat and gripped the paddle, memories flooded back. Summer afternoons with our mother at Lake Powell, her patient voice teaching me to paddle, the feel of sun on my face and water beneath me. For a moment, I was 12 years old again, racing my mother across a sun-dappled lake while she laughed and cheered me on. I shook off the memory and pushed away from shore. The kayak moved smoothly through the water, responding to my paddle strokes with surprising ease. Soon, I was keeping pace with Amanda and Derek, all 3 of us gliding across the lake in comfortable silence. "Look at that," Derek said, pointing toward the center of the lake. "You can see all the way to the bottom." He was right. The water was so clear it was like floating on air. Fish moved lazily in the depths, and I could see fallen logs and rocks scattered across the lake floor 30 feet below. The clarity was disorienting, creating the illusion that we were suspended in space rather than floating on water. We paddled for about an hour, exploring the lake's various coves and inlets. Amanda took dozens of photos with her waterproof camera, trying to capture the perfect reflections of the surrounding peaks. Derek tested the kayak's limits, seeing how fast he could make it go and how sharply he could turn. I found myself gravitating toward the lake's center, where the water was deepest and darkest. There was something hypnotic about staring down into those depths, watching the interplay of light and shadow on the lake floor far below. Several times, I thought I saw movement down there. Not fish, but something larger, more purposeful. "Jenny, you're drifting," Amanda called. I looked up to find that I'd stopped paddling and was floating motionless in the center of the lake. Amanda and Derek were 20 yards away, watching me with concern. "Sorry," I called back, dipping my paddle to close the distance. "Just enjoying the view." But as I rejoined them, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the depths. Every time I looked down, I caught glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision, shapes that disappeared the moment I focused on them. We returned to shore around noon and spent the afternoon hiking one of the trails that wound through the forest surrounding the lake. The physical activity was good for me, burning off some of the restless energy that had been building since the previous night. Amanda and Derek were good company, pointing out wildlife and sharing stories from their other camping adventures. By evening, I was feeling more like myself. Whatever I'd experienced the night before seemed like a dream, the product of stress and an overactive imagination. I helped prepare dinner and actually enjoyed the meal, laughing at Derek's terrible jokes and listening to Amanda's plans for their next RV trip. As darkness fell, however, my anxiety began to return. The lake, which had seemed benign during daylight, took on a more ominous character as shadows lengthened across its surface. The perfect reflections that had charmed us all day began to seem sinister, as if the water was showing us glimpses of some alternate reality. "I think I'll turn in early," I announced after we'd finished cleaning up. All that paddling wore me out. Amanda and Derek decided to stay outside by the fire for a while, so I went into the RV alone. I brushed my teeth, changed into my pajamas, and settled into bed with a book, hoping to read myself to sleep. But I couldn't concentrate on the words. My attention kept drifting to the windows, to the darkness beyond the glass, to the lake that lay just yards from where I was lying. Every sound, the settling of the RV, the whisper of wind in the trees, Derek's laughter from outside, made me jump. Around 11 o'clock, Amanda and Derek came inside, talking quietly as they prepared for bed. Soon, the RV was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the distant sound of Derek's snoring. I was finally starting to drift off when I heard it again. "Jenny!" My eyes snapped open. The voice was unmistakably clear, coming from just outside the RV. "Jenny, come outside. I need to tell you something." I lay perfectly still, my heart racing. It was the same voice from the night before. The voice that sounded so much like my mother, but it was different now. More urgent, more insistent. "Jenny, please, I don't have much time." The pull was even stronger than before, a physical ache in my chest that demanded I respond. I found myself sitting up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed, moving toward the door without conscious decision. "I've been waiting for you," the voice continued. "I have something important to show you, something about the day I died." I froze with my hand on the door handle. That was something my mother would say, something that would draw me outside despite every rational instinct, because I'd never known the full truth about her death, had never understood why she'd been alone on the lake that day, or what had caused her boat to capsize. "Come to the water, sweetheart. Let me show you what really happened." I turned the handle and stepped outside. The night was cold and still, with a canopy of stars so bright they cast shadows on the ground. The lake stretched before me like a sheet of black glass, its surface broken only by the gentle ripples that lapped against the shore. And there, standing knee-deep in the water about 20 feet from the bank, was my mother. She looked exactly as I remembered her. The same shoulder-length brown hair, the same gentle face, the same white sundress she'd been wearing the last time I saw her alive. But her skin was pale, almost luminous in the starlight, and her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect more than just the night sky. "There you are," she said, smiling the same warm smile that had comforted me through countless childhood fears. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Mom?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Is it really you?" "Of course it's me, sweetheart. I've been trying to reach you for so long, but this is the first time you've been somewhere I could manifest clearly." I took a step toward the water's edge, drawn by her familiar presence. "I don't understand. You're dead. I was at your funeral." Her expression grew sad. "Death isn't what people think it is, Jenny. It's not an ending. It's a transition. And some transitions are more complete than others." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I never fully crossed over. Part of me has been trapped here, in places like this, trying to reach the people I love, trying to deliver messages that were never sent." She gestured for me to come closer. "Come into the water, sweetheart. I can only maintain this form while I'm connected to the lake." I hesitated at the water's edge. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't identify what. My mother looked real, sounded real, but there was something off about her movements, as if she was slightly out of sync with her own voice. "I know this is frightening," she said gently, "but I need you to trust me. I have something to give you, something I should have given you years ago." "What?" "The truth about what happened to me, about why I was alone on the lake that day, about the choice I made." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent years wondering about that day, creating elaborate theories to explain why my mother had gone out on the water alone, why she hadn't worn a life jacket, why her body had never been found. "Tell me," I said, stepping into the shallows. The water was shockingly cold, so cold it made my bones ache. But I kept moving forward, drawn by the promise of answers I'd waited 17 years to hear. "That's it," my mother said as I waded deeper. "Come to me." When I was waist deep, close enough to touch her, I stopped. This close, I could see that her skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. Her eyes, which had always been warm brown, were now black as the lake itself. "Mom, you look different." She reached out and took my hands in hers. Her touch was ice cold and her fingers felt slimy, like pond weeds. "I look the way the water made me," she said, and her voice had changed too. It was still recognizably hers, but there was something else underneath it now, something that hissed and whispered like water over stones. "I don't understand." "The lake, sweetheart. It changes things. It changed me, and now it wants to change you too." Her grip tightened on my hands, and I realized with growing horror that I couldn't pull away. Her fingers had elongated, becoming more like tentacles than human digits, and they were wrapped around my wrists with impossible strength. "Mom, let go. You're hurting me." "It doesn't hurt for long," she said, and her face was changing now. The features I'd loved so much melting and reforming into something that was almost human, but not quite. "The lake takes away all the pain, all the loneliness, all the worry. You'll understand once you're part of it." She began pulling me deeper into the water, her grip unbreakable. The lake bottom dropped away beneath my feet, and I found myself treading water, supported only by her hold on my wrists. "This isn't real," I gasped. "You're not my mother." "I am, and I'm not," the thing wearing my mother's face replied. "I'm what she became when the lake claimed her. And soon, you'll be what I become when it claims you." The water around us began to churn, and I felt other hands grabbing at my legs, my arms, my hair. Looking down through the clear water, I could see them. Dozens of pale figures rising from the depths, all reaching for me with elongated fingers and faces that might once have been human. "No!" I screamed, finally finding the strength to struggle. "Let me go!" But the thing that had been my mother only smiled with teeth that were now pointed like a shark's. "Too late, sweetheart. The lake has already tasted you. It knows you now." I was pulled under, the cold water closing over my head like a tomb. But instead of drowning, I found I could breathe. The lake water filled my lungs like air, and I could see clearly in the darkness of the depths. All around me, the pale figures swam in slow circles, their movements hypnotic and graceful. They were beautiful in their own terrible way, transformed by the lake into something between human and fish. Their skin scaled and their eyes black as obsidian. "Welcome," they whispered in voices like bubbling water. "Welcome to the deep places." And I understood. This lake wasn't just a body of water. It was something alive, something ancient and hungry that fed on human longing and grief. It had been calling to people for generations, luring them with visions of what they'd lost, what they missed most. And once it had them, it changed them, made them into bait for the next victims. My mother had come here 17 years ago, probably chasing some vision of her own mother, who had died when she was young. And now I was here, drawn by the image of her. "You'll like it here," the thing wearing my mother's face said as we sank deeper into the lake's depths. "No more pain, no more struggling to make sense of life, just peace and the eternal dance." I felt my lungs adapting to the water, my skin beginning to take on the same pale, translucent quality as the others. Part of me wanted to give in, to accept the transformation and join the endless swimming in the dark depths. It would be so much easier than the struggle of living, of dealing with loss and disappointment and the constant effort of being human. But then I thought of Amanda, probably still asleep in the RV, unaware that her sister was drowning just yards away. I thought of my father, who had already lost his wife and couldn't bear to lose a daughter too. I thought of all the people who would be drawn to this place in the future, lured by visions of their own dead loved ones. "No," I said, and somehow my voice carried clearly through the water. "I won't do this." I began to fight, kicking and clawing my way toward the surface. The pale figures tried to hold me, but my sudden resistance seemed to weaken their grip. The thing wearing my mother's face snarled with frustration, its human facade falling away completely to reveal something with too many teeth and eyes like black holes. "You can't leave," it hissed. "No one leaves once they've seen the deep places." But I was already rising, propelled by desperate strength and the will to live. The surface seemed impossibly far above me, but I kept swimming, kept fighting against the hands that grabbed at me from below. I broke through into the night air with a gasp that felt like being born. The shore was only 20 feet away, but it might as well have been 20 miles. My limbs felt like lead, and the water seemed to drag at me with every stroke. Behind me, I could hear them rising, the pale figures breaking the surface in pursuit. their alien voices calling my name in a dozen different tones. But they couldn't leave the water, I realized. They were bound to the lake, transformed by it, but also imprisoned by it. I dragged myself onto the shore and collapsed, coughing up lake water and gasping for air. When I looked back at the water, it was perfectly calm again, reflecting the stars as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I could still hear them calling from the depths, and I could feel the lake's pull trying to draw me back. Part of me had been changed by the experience, marked in some way that would always make me susceptible to its call. I stumbled back to the RV, my wet pajamas clinging to my skin and my teeth chattering from cold and shock. Amanda and Derek were still asleep, undisturbed by my absence or the supernatural drama that had played out just outside their bedroom window. I changed into dry clothes and spent the rest of the night sitting at the dinette, watching the lake through the window. Several times I saw pale shapes moving beneath the surface, and once, just before dawn, I thought I saw my mother's face looking up at me from the depths. But when the sun rose and painted the lake in shades of gold and silver, it looked like any other alpine lake, beautiful, peaceful, innocent. The perfect mirror that had captivated us all. Amanda found me there when she woke up. "Jenny, are you okay? You look terrible." "I need to leave," I said. "Right now, this morning." "What? But we just got here. We have 3 more days reserved." "I can't stay here, Amanda. Something happened last night. Something with the lake." She studied my face, taking in my obvious distress. "Another dream?" "Not a dream. I went into the water. There are things down there, things that used to be people. They tried to keep me." Amanda and Derek exchanged glances. I could see them having a silent conversation about my mental state, about whether I was having some kind of breakdown. "Okay," Amanda said carefully. "If you really want to leave, we can leave. But maybe we should talk to someone first. A doctor, or—" "I'm not crazy," I said, though I wondered if that was true. "I know how it sounds, but I'm not making this up." Derek began packing up the RV without further argument, perhaps recognizing that I was beyond reasoning with. Amanda helped, though she kept shooting worried glances in my direction. As we prepared to leave, I noticed that the other RVs in the campground were still there. The Airstream, the Class C, the fifth-wheel trailer, but they were all dark, all silent, as if their occupants had simply vanished, or as if they'd never been human occupants at all. We left Mirror Lake that morning, driving down the winding mountain road in silence. I sat in the passenger area, watching the lake shrink in the distance until it was just a glimmer of light between the trees. But even now, 3 months later, I can still feel its pull. I dream about it almost every night, dreams of swimming in those crystal-clear depths, of joining the eternal dance of the pale figures, of finally finding peace in the water's cold embrace. Amanda thinks I had some kind of psychological break, triggered by stress and the high altitude. She's arranged for me to see a therapist, and she checks on me constantly, worried that her little sister is losing her grip on reality. Maybe she's right. Maybe the whole thing was a hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion. Maybe there's nothing supernatural about Mirror Lake, nothing more sinister than cold water and an overactive imagination. But I know what I felt in those depths. I know the touch of those impossible hands, the sight of faces that had once been human. And I know that somewhere in the dark water of an alpine lake in Utah, something is waiting for me to return, because I will return. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. The lake has marked me, claimed a piece of my soul, and that piece calls to the rest. I feel it growing stronger every day, the need to go back, to finish what was started that night. Amanda doesn't know that I've been researching the lake online, reading about its history, about the disappearances that local authorities prefer not to discuss. She doesn't know that I've been having conversations with other people who visited Mirror Lake and experienced things they can't explain. There are more of us than you might think. People who've heard voices calling from the water, who've seen figures that shouldn't exist, who've felt the lake's hunger for human souls. Most of us try to stay away, to resist the call, but some don't. Some return to the lake, and they're never seen again. I think about them sometimes. the ones who went back. Are they swimming in the depths now, transformed into something between human and fish? Are they part of the eternal dance, calling to new victims with voices of the dead? Or are they something else entirely? Something I can't imagine? Something the lake makes from the raw material of human longing and despair? I don't know, but I suspect I'll find out eventually. Because the dreams are getting stronger, more vivid, more compelling. And in them, my mother is always there, calling to me from the deep places, promising answers to questions I never knew I had. Come back, Jenny, she whispers in my sleep. Come home to the water, and God help me, I want to listen. Found among the personal effects of Jennifer Williams, age 29, reported missing while hiking near Mirror Lake in Utah's Uinta Mountains, January 2025. Ms. Williams was last seen by other hikers walking toward the lake at sunset, despite warnings that the area was closed for winter conditions. Search teams found her camping gear at a trailhead, but no trace of Ms. Williams herself. The lake was frozen solid at the time of her disappearance, with ice thickness measured at over 3 feet. Local authorities list the case as an accidental death, presuming she fell through thin ice, though no break in the ice surface was ever found. Her family continues to search for answers. We should have never gone to Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington. I'm Robert Johnson. I was 41 back then, and this is the story of how I lost everything. My wife, Lisa, and I had been planning this RV trip for our 20th wedding anniversary. After 2 decades of marriage, 3 kids, and careers that had consumed most of our adult lives, we needed time alone together. The kids were finally old enough to stay with Lisa's parents for a week, and we'd rented a beautiful 32-foot Winnebago Vista for what was supposed to be our second honeymoon. Just you and me, Lisa had said as we loaded our supplies into the RV that crisp September morning. No schedules, no responsibilities, no one needing anything from us. At 43, Lisa was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Her auburn hair caught the morning light as she double-checked our camping gear, and when she smiled at me over the checklist, I felt like that 21-year-old kid who'd fallen in love with her in college all over again. We'd chosen Gifford-Pinchot because it was remote but accessible, with RV-friendly campgrounds and miles of hiking trails through old-growth forest. The online reviews had been glowing. Families talking about the pristine wilderness, the incredible wildlife viewing, the sense of stepping back in time to when the Pacific Northwest was still untamed. What they didn't mention was why so many of the trails had been closed in recent years, or why the local rangers seemed nervous when we asked about backcountry camping. The drive from Seattle took us through increasingly dense forest, the highway winding between massive Douglas firs and western hemlocks that blocked out most of the sky. Lisa navigated while I drove, both of us marveling at the sheer scale of the trees around us. Some of these are probably 1,000 years old, she said, reading from our guidebook. They were here before European settlers, before Native American tribes, maybe even before the last ice age. Makes you feel pretty small, I replied, craning my neck to see the tops of the giants towering above us. Our destination was Bone Creek Campground, a small facility deep in the forest that catered specifically to RV campers. According to our reservation confirmation, it offered full hookups, clean restrooms, and easy access to some of the forest's most spectacular hiking trails. The name should have been our first warning. We found the campground entrance around 3 in the afternoon, marked by a weathered wooden sign that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The access road was paved but narrow, winding through dense stands of trees that grew so close together they formed a tunnel of green overhead. Feels like we're driving into another world, Lisa observed. And she wasn't wrong. The deeper we went into the forest, the more the normal sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by an almost oppressive silence broken only by the occasional bird call or the whisper of wind through needles. The campground itself was larger than I'd expected, with about 30 sites arranged in 3 loops connected by gravel roads. Most of the sites were empty, which surprised me given that we were visiting during peak fall camping season. Only 4 other RVs were visible. A massive Class A motorhome parked at the far end of the campground, a vintage Airstream trailer that looked like it had been there for months, and 2 smaller travel trailers with out-of-state plates. Our assigned site was in the middle loop, backing up to the forest. As I maneuvered our RV into position, I noticed something odd about the trees behind our site. They were all dead. Not recently dead, but long dead. Massive trunks stripped of bark and bleached white by years of weather. They stood like skeletal fingers against the green backdrop of the living forest, creating an eerie contrast that made me uncomfortable. "That's strange," Lisa said, following my gaze. "Wonder what killed them?" "Disease, probably," I said, though I wasn't convinced. The dead trees formed an almost perfect circle about 50 yards across, as if something had deliberately poisoned the ground in that specific area. We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up camp and exploring the immediate area. The routine activities were soothing, extending the slide-outs, connecting utilities, arranging our outdoor furniture. For the first time in months, I felt truly relaxed, disconnected from the constant pressure of work and family obligations. Lisa found a trail map at the campground's information kiosk and began planning our hiking routes for the next few days. The map showed dozens of trails radiating out from the campground like spokes on a wheel, most leading to scenic overlooks, waterfalls, or hidden lakes. But several trails were marked with red X's and the notation, "closed indefinitely." "That's odd," she said, studying the map more closely. "Look at this. Almost half the trails are closed. Wonder why?" I looked over her shoulder at the map. The closed trails seemed to be concentrated in one area, forming a rough circle around something called Bone Creek Valley. No explanation was given for the closures, just the stark red marks and warnings to stay on designated paths. "Probably just maintenance issues," I suggested, though something about the pattern nagged at me. As evening approached, we fired up our outdoor grill and prepared our first camp dinner. The smell of grilling salmon filled the air, and Lisa opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. For a while, it felt like the romantic getaway we'd planned, but as darkness fell, the forest around us began to feel different. The silence was the first thing I noticed. During the day, there had been normal forest sounds: birds singing, squirrels chattering, the distant rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But as night descended, those sounds faded away completely, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy. "It's so quiet," Lisa observed, unconsciously lowering her voice. She was right. Not just quiet, eerily, unnaturally quiet. Even the wind had died to nothing, leaving the massive trees standing like silent sentinels around our campsite. We retreated inside the RV around 9 o'clock, ostensibly to play cards and enjoy another glass of wine, but really because the oppressive silence outside was making us both nervous. The RV's interior lights created a warm, cozy atmosphere that helped push back the darkness beyond the windows. "This is nice," Lisa said, dealing a hand of gin rummy. "When's the last time we spent an evening together without any distractions?" I couldn't remember, which made me feel guilty. Between my job in construction management and hers in real estate, plus the kids' activities and social obligations, we'd gotten into the habit of existing parallel to each other rather than together. "We should do this more often," I said, reaching across the small table to take her hand. "Maybe not in the middle of nowhere, but definitely the unplugged time together." She smiled and squeezed my fingers. "I love you, Rob. I know I don't say it enough anymore, but I do." We were sharing a moment of genuine connection when we heard the first sound from outside. It was soft at first, barely audible over the RV's heater, a rhythmic tapping like someone knocking gently on wood. We both froze, listening intently. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from the forest behind our site, from the direction of the dead trees. "What is that?" Lisa whispered. I moved to the rear window and peered out into the darkness. The dead trees were visible as pale shapes against the night sky, but I couldn't see any movement or identify the source of the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It continued for about 5 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. We waited, holding our breath, but heard nothing more. "Probably just a woodpecker," I said. though I'd never heard of woodpeckers being active at night. In dead trees? Lisa asked. I didn't have an answer for that. We tried to return to our card game, but the mood had been broken. Every small sound from outside, the settling of the RV, the whisper of wind in the trees, made us both jump. Finally, around 11 o'clock, we decided to call it a night. I was brushing my teeth when the tapping started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent, and clearly coming from multiple sources. It sounded like someone was systematically striking each of the dead trees behind our site, moving from one to the next in a deliberate pattern. Tap, 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 move, tap, 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 move. "Rob," Lisa called from the bedroom. "Come listen to this." I joined her at the rear window and we both peered out into the darkness. The tapping continued, but I still couldn't see anything moving among the dead trees. "That doesn't sound like an animal," she said. I agreed, but what else could it be? We were miles from the nearest town, deep in wilderness that few people ever visited. The chances of someone else being out there in the middle of the night were essentially zero. The tapping went on for about 20 minutes, following the same pattern. 3 strikes on one tree, then movement to the next. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn someone was systematically testing each dead trunk, perhaps looking for something. Then it stopped, and the oppressive silence returned. We lay in bed, listening to the quiet, both of us too tense to sleep. Every few minutes, one of us would whisper, "Did you hear that?" But it was always just our imagination, our nerves creating sounds in the darkness. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to Lisa shaking my shoulder gently. "Rob," she whispered urgently, "look outside." Through the bedroom window, I could see pale shapes moving among the dead trees. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, creating phantom movement in the darkness. But as I watched more carefully, I could clearly see figures walking between the skeletal trunks. They were tall and thin, moving with an odd, jerky gait that reminded me of marionettes. Their skin, if it was skin, seemed to glow with a faint phosphorescence that made them visible against the dark forest. "Jesus," I breathed. "What are those?" "I don't know," Lisa whispered. "They've been out there for about 10 minutes, just walking around the dead trees in circles." I counted at least 6 of the figures, though they moved in such a synchronized pattern it was hard to get an exact number. They seemed to be searching for something, bending down occasionally to examine the ground or reaching up to touch the bare branches. "Should we call someone?" Lisa asked. "Call who? We don't have cell service out here." We watched for another 20 minutes as the pale figures continued their strange dance among the dead trees. Sometimes they would cluster together as if conferring, then spread out again to resume their search. Their movements were hypnotic in their rhythmic precision. Then, without warning, they all stopped and turned toward our RV. Even from a distance of 50 yards, I could feel their attention focused on us with laser intensity. They stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, and although I couldn't make out facial features in the darkness, I knew they were staring directly at our window. Lisa grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt. "They know we're watching." One of the figures raised its arm and pointed at our RV. The gesture seemed to be a signal, because the others immediately began moving toward us with that same jerky, unnatural gait. "Lock the door," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why I was whispering. Lisa hurried to the front of the RV while I continued watching the approaching figures. As they got closer, I could see more details, and what I saw made my blood run cold. They weren't human. The basic shape was humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But the proportions were all wrong. Their limbs were too long and too thin, jointed in places where human joints shouldn't be. Their heads were elongated and seemed to lack hair or any other defining features. Most disturbing was their skin, which had the pale, translucent quality of something that had never seen sunlight. I could see dark shapes moving beneath the surface, what might have been veins or organs, but arranged in patterns that made no anatomical sense. They reached the edge of our campsite and stopped, forming a rough semicircle around the RV. Now I could see their faces clearly, and I wished I couldn't. They had eyes, large, black, and completely without iris or pupil, like holes punched through their skulls. Their mouths were lipless slits that seemed too wide for their faces, and when they opened those mouths, the sound that emerged was like nothing I'd ever heard. It started as a low hum, barely audible, then gradually rose in pitch until it became a keening wail that seemed to vibrate through the RV's walls and into my bones. The sound was mournful, hungry, and utterly alien. Lisa returned from the front of the RV, her face pale with terror. "The door's locked, but Rob, they're not just behind us. There are more of them. They're surrounding us." I looked out the front window and saw she was right. At least a dozen of the creatures had emerged from the forest, forming a complete circle around our RV. They all stood perfectly still, their black eyes fixed on our vehicle, their mouths open in that continuous, otherworldly keen. "What do they want?" Lisa whispered. I had no idea, but I was certain we didn't want to find out. The keening continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The creatures lowered their heads, took a step backward in perfect unison, and began to fade. Not walk away. Fade. Their phosphorescent glow dimmed gradually until they became translucent, then transparent, then invisible. In less than a minute, they had vanished completely, leaving no trace they had ever been there. Lisa and I stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the empty campsite. The silence that followed was even more oppressive than what had come before, weighted with the memory of those alien voices. "We're leaving," I said finally. "First thing in the morning, we're getting out of here." Lisa nodded without argument. Whatever those things were, we wanted no part of them. But when morning came, leaving proved to be more complicated than we'd anticipated. I woke around dawn to find Lisa already up, sitting at the dinette with a cup of coffee and staring out the window with a troubled expression. "Sleep at all?" I asked. "A little. Rob, come look at this." I joined her at the window and immediately saw what had captured her attention. The ground around our RV was covered with tracks. Not footprints exactly, but strange indentations in the soft earth that looked like someone had pressed irregular shapes into the dirt. "Those weren't there yesterday," she said. I went outside to examine the marks more closely. They formed concentric circles around the RV, as if the creatures had been dancing or performing some kind of ritual during the night. The indentations were about 6 inches long and 3 inches wide, with a pattern of smaller marks that might have been toe prints. But the most disturbing discovery was what I found at the edge of the dead tree circle. Bones. Dozens of them, arranged in neat piles around the base of each skeletal trunk. They were old, bleached white by weather and time, but I could identify fragments of ribs, vertebrae, and what looked like pieces of skull. Some were clearly from animals. Deer, maybe, or elk, but others were the wrong size and shape for any animal I could identify. "Lisa," I called, "you need to see this." She joined me at the edge of the bone field, her face going pale as she took in the macabre display. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Rob, some of these look like—" "I know." Mixed in with the animal bones were fragments that could only have come from humans. A jawbone with molars still attached. Part of a pelvis. What might have been a human femur, snapped in half to expose the marrow cavity. "We need to call the police," Lisa said. "With what? We don't have cell service, remember?" I was already moving back toward the RV, urgency driving my actions. Whatever had happened in this place, we needed to get away from it as quickly as possible. "Pack everything," I said. "We're leaving right now." It took us 45 minutes to break camp, disconnecting utilities and securing everything for travel. As we worked, I kept glancing toward the bone circle, half expecting the pale creatures to emerge from the forest again. But the woods remained silent and still. Lisa was loading the last of our gear when she called out in alarm. "Rob, the other RVs!" I looked where she was pointing and felt my stomach drop. The massive Class A motorhome that had been parked at the far end of the campground was gone. So was one of the travel trailers. The vintage Airstream was still there, but something was wrong with it. We drove over to investigate, and what we found made Lisa gasp and grab my arm. The Airstream's door was standing wide open, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Through the opening, I could see the interior had been completely ransacked. Cushions torn apart, cabinets ripped open, belongings scattered everywhere. But there were no signs of the occupants. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" No response. I approached the trailer cautiously, Lisa staying close behind me. The scene inside was even worse than it had appeared from outside. It looked like a tornado had hit the small space. Everything destroyed, as if someone had been searching frantically for something. But what caught my attention were the scratches. Deep gouges had been carved into the aluminum walls, forming patterns that looked almost like writing in some unknown language. The marks were too precise to be random damage, too deliberate to be the result of a simple break-in. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to something near the trailer's rear window. On the floor, scratched into the metal with the same precision as the wall markings, was a message in English. "They take the bones." Below it, in different handwriting, someone had added, "Don't go into the circle." "We're leaving," I said firmly, "right now." But when we returned to our RV and tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The dashboard lights came on, the radio worked, but when I turned the key, there was only silence. "What's wrong?" Lisa asked. I popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. Someone, or something, had systematically destroyed our engine. Wires had been torn out, hoses severed, essential components simply missing. The damage was so extensive that the RV would never run again without major repairs. "We're stranded," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Lisa stared at the ruined engine in disbelief. "Who would do this? Why?" I didn't answer, but I was beginning to understand. The creatures we'd seen the night before hadn't just been curious observers. They'd been preparing something, setting a trap, and we'd walked right into it. "There's got to be another way out," Lisa said. "Maybe we can hike back to the main road, flag down help." I checked our map. The highway was 12 miles away through dense forest, following a winding road that would be easy to get lost on. But staying here wasn't an option. "Pack light," I said, "just water, food, and emergency supplies. We'll travel during the day, stick to the road." We spent an hour preparing for the hike, filling our backpacks with essentials and checking our compass bearings. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the bone circle behind our campsite. The piles of bones had been rearranged during the night. Instead of random heaps, they now formed distinct patterns, spirals and geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of the circle, something new had appeared. A wooden post, about 6 feet tall, driven deep into the ground. Hanging from it on crude rope were pieces of fabric, metal objects, and what looked like personal belongings. A watch, a wallet, a child's toy. Trophies, I realized, taken from previous victims. "Don't look," I told Lisa, guiding her toward the road. "Just keep moving." The hike out started well enough. The gravel road was easy to follow, and the morning sun filtered through the forest canopy in a way that was almost pleasant. For the first few miles, I allowed myself to hope we would make it to safety without incident. But as we walked deeper into the forest, I began to notice changes in our surroundings. The trees were getting larger and more twisted, their branches intertwining overhead to form an almost solid canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The road surface became rougher, with deep ruts and missing sections that suggested it hadn't been maintained in years. Most disturbing were the signs. They started small, broken branches arranged in deliberate patterns, rocks stacked in unnatural formations, scratches on tree bark that might have been random but felt purposeful. But as we continued, the signs became more obvious and more threatening. Trees had been stripped of bark in spiraling patterns that made them look like giant candy canes. Animal skulls hung from branches at eye level, their empty sockets seeming to track our movement. And everywhere, carved into bark and scratched into rocks, were symbols that matched what we'd seen in the Airstream trailer. "This is wrong," Lisa said after we'd been walking for 2 hours. "We should have reached the highway by now." I checked my watch and realized she was right. According to the map, 12 miles should have taken us about 4 hours of hiking. But we'd been walking for nearly 3 hours at a good pace, and the forest around us looked no different than when we'd started. Maybe we took a wrong turn, I suggested, though I couldn't remember seeing any side roads or intersections. Rob, look at this. Lisa was standing beside a large Douglas fir, pointing at something carved into its trunk. It was a message in English, scratched into the bark with the same crude technique we'd seen everywhere else. Mile 1. Below it, in different handwriting, someone had added, "No escape." I stared at the markings, my mind refusing to process what they implied. If this was mile 1, then we'd been walking in circles for hours, covering the same ground over and over without realizing it. That's impossible, I said. We've been following the road the whole time. There haven't been any turns or forks. But even as I said it, I was beginning to doubt my own memory. The forest around us looked the same as it had hours ago. The same twisted trees, the same oppressive canopy, the same sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Lisa pulled out her compass and checked our bearing. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. "The compass isn't working," she said, her voice tight with fear. I tried my own compass with the same result. Something about this place was interfering with the magnetic fields, making navigation impossible. "We need to mark our path," I said, pulling out my knife. "Cut blazes into the trees so we can tell if we're going in circles." It was a good plan in theory, but it revealed the horrible truth of our situation. Within an hour of marking trees, we started encountering our own blazes coming from the wrong direction. The road we'd been following was somehow looping back on itself, defying all logic and geography. "This isn't natural," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something is doing this to us." As if summoned by her words, we heard it. The same keening wail we'd experienced the night before, but louder now, coming from multiple directions at once. The sound seemed to emanate from the forest itself, as if the trees were screaming. Through the twisted branches, I caught glimpses of pale figures moving parallel to our path. They stayed just at the edge of visibility, matching our pace but never coming closer. Yet, they're herding us, I realized, forcing us to walk in circles until we're too exhausted to resist. The keening grew louder, more insistent. And now I could hear something else underneath it, a rhythmic tapping that I recognized from the night before. Tap, tap, tap. The creatures were communicating, coordinating their movements, and they were getting closer. "Run," I said. We abandoned the road and plunged into the forest, crashing through underbrush and dodging between massive tree trunks. Behind us, the keening rose to a crescendo, and I could hear the sound of pursuit. Not footsteps exactly, but something moving through the forest with inhuman speed and agility. Branches tore at our clothes and faces as we ran. Lisa stumbled over a fallen log and I hauled her to her feet, both of us gasping for breath in the thin mountain air. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, and I could see pale shapes flickering between the trees. Then, suddenly, we broke through into a clearing. It was roughly circular, about 100 yards across, and completely barren of vegetation. The ground was packed earth covered with bones, thousands of them, arranged in intricate patterns that spiraled outward from a central point. At the center of the bone mandala stood a structure that defied description. It might have been a shrine, or an altar, or something else entirely. It was built from the same bones that covered the ground, fused together with some kind of organic mortar that had hardened to the consistency of concrete. The structure was about 12 feet tall and vaguely pyramidal, with openings at various levels that might have been windows or doors. From these openings, the pale creatures emerged. They flowed out of the bone structure like liquid, dozens of them, then hundreds. As they materialized in the clearing, they began to circle us with that same synchronized movement we'd witnessed the night before. "The bone circle," Lisa whispered. "We're in the bone circle." The creatures moved closer, tightening their formation until we were trapped in the center of the clearing with nowhere to run. Up close, I could see details I'd missed in the darkness. The way their translucent skin revealed the movement of things underneath. The patterns of holes that served as nostrils and ears. The way their mouths opened wider than any human mouth should. One of them, larger than the others, approached us directly. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of wind through dry leaves. "You have seen the signs," it said. "You have witnessed the dance. You have entered the sacred circle. What do you want?" I managed to ask. "What we have always wanted," the creature replied. "What all hunger demands: sustenance, growth, continuation." It gestured toward the bone structure with one impossibly long arm. "This is our temple, built from the gifts of those who came before. Each bone carries memory, carries essence. Each fragment adds to our understanding." I looked at the thousands of bones surrounding us and felt sick. How many people had died in this place? How many had been lured here by the same forces that had trapped us? "You don't have to do this," Lisa said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We're just passing through. We don't know anything about your sacred circle." The creature tilted its elongated head, studying her with those black, empty eyes. "Knowledge is not required. Only presence. Only the willingness to join the dance." More creatures emerged from the bone structure, carrying objects I recognized. Our own belongings, taken from the RV during the night. My laptop, Lisa's jewelry, family photos from our wallet. The trophies that would be added to the collection. However, the lead creature continued, the dance requires preparation, purification, understanding. It gestured again, and several of the other creatures moved forward, reaching out with their elongated fingers. When they touched us, I felt a strange numbness spread from the point of contact, as if something was being drained from my body. "The bones remember," the creature whispered. "They remember the fear, the pain, the final moments. These memories feed us, sustain us, allow us to grow." The numbness was spreading up my arms, and I could see the same thing happening to Lisa. Whatever these things were doing to us, it was weakening us, preparing us for whatever came next. But as the paralysis crept through my body, I remembered something. The message scratched into the Airstream trailer. "Don't go into the circle." Someone had escaped this place before. Someone had gotten away long enough to leave a warning, which meant there had to be a way out. I forced myself to think clearly despite the growing numbness. The creatures had surrounded us in the center of the clearing, but they hadn't actually touched the bone structure itself. They emerged from it, but they maintained a respectful distance from the central spire. What if the structure wasn't their source of power, but their prison? What if something else controlled this place, and these creatures were just as trapped as we were? "Lisa," I whispered through lips that were barely responding to my commands. "The bones. Look at the patterns." She followed my gaze, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. The bone arrangements weren't random. They formed a massive symbol, a geometric pattern that covered the entire clearing. And at the center, where the bone structure stood, the pattern was broken. "Disruption," she breathed. The creatures had heard us whispering, and their keening grew agitated. The lead creature moved closer, its black eyes reflecting nothing. "The dance cannot be interrupted," it said. "The pattern must be preserved." But I was already moving, using the last of my strength to lunge toward the nearest section of the bone mandala. Lisa understood immediately and followed my lead, kicking at the carefully arranged patterns with her hiking boots. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As soon as the bone patterns were disturbed, the creatures let out a collective shriek that sounded like tearing metal. They began to flicker, their forms becoming unstable, as if the disruption of the mandala was somehow disrupting their existence. "The pattern," the lead creature cried. "You don't understand. Without the pattern, we cannot—" Its words were cut off as its form collapsed into itself, becoming transparent, then invisible. The others followed suit, winking out of existence one by one as Lisa and I continued to destroy their carefully constructed symbol. Within minutes, we were alone in the clearing, but our victory was short-lived. As the last of the creatures disappeared, the bone structure at the center of the clearing began to collapse. Whatever force had held it together was failing, and thousands of bones came cascading down in an avalanche of calcium and decay. "Run!" I shouted, though the numbness in my limbs made running difficult. We stumbled toward the edge of the clearing as the bone structure imploded behind us. The sound was incredible, like a building falling down, but mixed with something organic and wet. and underneath it all, I could hear the creatures keening, fainter now but still present, as if they were being pulled into some distant dimension. We reached the tree line just as the last of the structure fell. When I looked back, the clearing was empty except for a crater where the bone spire had stood. The mandala patterns were gone, scattered by the collapse, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the place was lifting. "Is it over?" Lisa asked. I didn't know, but for the first time since we'd arrived at Bone Creek Campground, the forest around us felt normal. I could hear birds singing again, could feel a natural breeze stirring the leaves overhead. "I think so," I said, "but let's not stick around to find out." Finding our way back to the campground proved surprisingly easy once the supernatural interference was gone. Our compasses worked properly, and the road no longer looped back on itself. Within 2 hours, we were standing beside our disabled RV, trying to figure out our next move. The damage to the engine was real and extensive, but I managed to jerry-rig a temporary repair using parts from the abandoned Airstream. It wouldn't get us far, but it might be enough to reach the highway. As we prepared to leave, I took one last look at the dead tree circle behind our campsite. The bone piles were gone, scattered by the wind or reclaimed by the earth. The wooden post with its gruesome trophies had fallen over, and the personal belongings that had hung from it were nowhere to be seen. It was as if the whole nightmare had never happened. But I knew better. The scratches on my arms where the creatures had touched me were real. The exhaustion that went bone deep was real, and the memory of those black, empty eyes would stay with me forever. We made it to the highway just as our patched engine finally gave out completely. A passing motorist called for help, and within hours we were on our way back to Seattle in a tow truck, our RV trailing behind us like a wounded animal. The official report listed our experience as equipment failure and disorientation due to altitude sickness. The rangers who investigated found no evidence of the bone circle, no traces of the creatures, no explanation for what had happened to the other campers. But they did close Bone Creek Campground permanently, citing ongoing safety concerns and structural issues. The access road was gated off and warning signs were posted to keep people away. Sometimes I wonder about the other RVs that disappeared that night. Were their occupants taken into the bone structure? Did they become part of the creature's dance? Or did they escape, like us, but decide never to speak of what they'd experienced? I also wonder about the source of the creatures themselves. Were they the spirits of previous victims, transformed by whatever force controlled that place? Or were they something older, something that had been waiting in the forest long before humans ever set foot in the Pacific Northwest? I don't have answers to those questions, and I'm not sure I want them. What I do know is that Gifford-Pinchot National Forest is larger than most people realize, with thousands of square miles of wilderness that few humans ever explore. And in some of those remote places, things exist that don't belong in any rational understanding of the world. Lisa and I never went camping again. We sold our house in Seattle 6 months later and moved to Phoenix, as far from the deep forest as we could get. We told everyone it was for my health. The dry climate would be better for my allergies. But the real reason was simpler. We needed to be somewhere the trees couldn't whisper to us in the dark, somewhere the ground couldn't hide ancient symbols and hungry spirits. Our marriage survived the experience, though it took years of therapy to work through the trauma. We're closer now than we were before, bound together by shared terror and the knowledge that we faced something impossible and lived to tell about it. But we're different people now, changed. Lisa developed an intense phobia of forests, of course, but also of patterns. She can't look at geometric designs without feeling sick, can't stand the sight of bones in museums or even chicken bones on her dinner plate. She works from home now, afraid to travel too far from familiar surroundings. I have my own issues. Insomnia mostly. I rarely sleep more than 3 hours at a time. When I do sleep, I dream of pale figures dancing in circles, of bone structures that grow like living things, of voices calling from deep in the forest. Sometimes I wake up to find myself standing at our bedroom window, staring out at the desert landscape and listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. The doctors say it's PTSD, and they're probably right. But they don't understand that the trauma goes deeper than psychological damage. Those creatures didn't just threaten our lives, they touched something essential in us, left marks that can't be seen but will never fully heal. 6 months after we moved to Phoenix, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an aerial view of what looked like Bone Creek campground but taken years after our visit. The campground was completely overgrown, reclaimed by the forest, but I could still make out the circular clearing where we'd encountered the bone structure. And in that clearing, barely visible through the tree canopy, was a new pattern. Not bones this time, but stones, thousands of them, arranged in the same spiraling mandala we'd disrupted. The structure at the center was different too, built from twisted wood and metal rather than bones, but unmistakably similar in design. The message was clear. We might have won a battle, but the war was far from over. Whatever force controlled that place had rebuilt, adapted, evolved. It was waiting for new victims, new sources of the memories and essence it needed to survive. I showed the photograph to Lisa once, and she had a panic attack so severe she had to be hospitalized. I never showed it to her again, but I kept it hidden in my desk drawer, pulling it out sometimes to remind myself that the nightmare was real. Over the years, I've done research into similar incidents. I've found scattered reports from across the Pacific Northwest. Hikers who disappeared in old-growth forests, campers who reported encounters with pale, elongated figures, entire camping parties that vanished without a trace from remote locations. The authorities always have explanations: equipment failure, wildlife attacks, people getting lost in challenging terrain. But I know better. I can see the patterns in the disappearances, the geographical clusters around certain wilderness areas, the subtle details that suggest something supernatural at work. There are more places like Bone Creek out there, more ancient forces that feed on human essence, more creatures that exist in the spaces between rational explanation and primitive fear. They're patient, these things, willing to wait decades between feedings, content to let their hunting grounds remain undisturbed until the right victims stumble into their domain. And they're learning. Each encounter teaches them more about human nature, about our fears and desires and weaknesses. The next time someone like Lisa and me wanders into their territory, the creatures will be better prepared, more sophisticated in their methods. That's why I'm writing this account, even though I know most people will dismiss it as the delusions of a traumatized mind. Because somewhere out there, another couple is planning their romantic RV getaway, studying maps and making reservations and dreaming of quality time in the wilderness. They deserve to know what's waiting for them in the deep forests. They deserve to understand that some camping experiences can change you in ways that go beyond simple memory, that can mark your soul with touches that never fully fade. Most of all, they deserve the chance to choose a different destination, to plan their adventure somewhere safer, somewhere the trees don't whisper and the ground doesn't hide symbols of power older than human civilization. Because once you've seen the bone dancers, once you've felt their touch and heard their keening voices, you never really escape. Part of you remains in those dark woods forever, dancing to rhythms that predate human understanding, contributing your essence to patterns that serve purposes no mortal mind can comprehend. Last week, I received another photograph. This one showed a different location, somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, based on the distinctive peak formations in the background. Another clearing, another stone mandala, another twisted structure rising from the center like a malignant growth. But this photograph was different. In the corner, barely visible among the trees at the clearing's edge, was a familiar figure. Tall, pale, elongated, one of the creatures we'd thought we'd defeated. It was holding something in its impossibly long fingers, a small object that glinted in the filtered sunlight. A camera. The thing had taken the photograph itself, somehow learned to use human technology, and sent it to me as a message. A reminder that our encounter had been just the beginning, not the end. And if these creatures were learning to use our tools, our methods of communication, Then they were evolving in ways I hadn't imagined. The next phase of their existence wouldn't be limited to remote forest clearings and ancient bone structures. They were coming to us. I don't know when or how, but I know it's inevitable. The patterns they serve are larger than any single location, more complex than simple territorial hunting. We disrupted one manifestation of their power, but the force behind them is vast, patient, and utterly alien in its motivations. Lisa doesn't know about the new photographs. She's fragile enough without that additional burden. But I've been preparing, researching, trying to understand what we're facing and how to protect the people we love. I've identified dozens of locations across the western United States where similar incidents have occurred. I've plotted them on maps, looking for patterns in their distribution, connections between the disappearances and geological features or historical events. What I've found is deeply disturbing. The incidents aren't random. They follow ley lines, ancient migration routes, places where indigenous peoples once performed sacred ceremonies. The entities we encountered aren't invaders or anomalies. They're part of something that's been here much longer than human civilization. We're the intruders in their domain. We're the ones who don't belong. But understanding that doesn't make us safer. If anything, it makes our situation more precarious. Because if these creatures represent some kind of natural balance, some ecological force we've disrupted through centuries of expansion and development, then our very existence might be seen as a threat requiring correction. The bone dancers might not be hunting us for sustenance. They might be hunting us for survival. 3 days ago, Lisa noticed something that made my blood run cold. We were sitting in our backyard, enjoying the desert sunset, when she pointed to a section of our rock garden. "That's odd," she said. "I don't remember arranging the stones that way." I looked where she was pointing and felt the familiar numbness creeping up my arms. The decorative stones in our garden had been rearranged into a small but unmistakable spiral pattern. The same basic design we'd seen in the bone mandala years before. Neither of us had touched those stones. We'd lived in this house for 3 years, and the garden had remained unchanged since we'd hired a landscaper to install it. But somehow, overnight, something had altered the arrangement. Something that knew exactly which pattern would trigger our deepest fears. They found us. I don't know how long we have before they make their next move, but I know it won't be long. The photograph, the stone pattern, the gradual escalation of contact, these are all signs of creatures preparing for a final confrontation. Lisa wants to run again, to pack up and move somewhere even more remote, somewhere the creatures can't follow. But I'm beginning to understand that running won't work anymore. We've seen too much, know too much, carry too many of their marks. Wherever we go, they'll find us. Whatever we do, the patterns will eventually emerge around us. The bone dancers have claimed us as their own, and that claim transcends distance or time. So instead of running, I'm going to fight. I've been studying the symbols we encountered, learning their significance and power. I've researched indigenous protection rituals, modern occult practices, anything that might give us an advantage against forces that exist outside conventional reality. Most importantly, I've been sharing our story. Not just this written account, but face-to-face conversations with other survivors, other people who've encountered things in the wilderness that don't belong in any rational worldview. There are more of us than I expected, much more, and we're starting to organize, because if the bone dancers are evolving, learning to use our technology and infiltrate our civilization, then we need to evolve too. We need to stop thinking of these encounters as isolated incidents and start recognizing them as part of a larger pattern, a coordinated campaign that's been building for decades. The creatures have had the advantage of secrecy, of operating in remote locations where witnesses were rare and evidence was easily dismissed. But that's changing. Communication networks, social media, crowdsourced research, all the tools of modern civilization can be turned against them. If we can map their territories, predict their movements, share knowledge about their weaknesses and limitations, then maybe we can level the playing field. Maybe we can protect future victims from experiencing what Lisa and I went through. Or maybe we're just deluding ourselves, trying to impose human solutions on a problem that transcends human understanding. But we have to try, because the alternative, accepting that ancient forces control our fate, that we're nothing more than prey animals in a cosmic food chain, is unacceptable. The stone pattern in our garden changes every few days now. Sometimes it's a spiral, sometimes a more complex geometric form, sometimes arrangements that hurt to look at directly. Lisa has stopped going outside, but I make myself examine each new configuration, photographing it and adding the images to my research files. I'm building a database of their symbolic language, trying to decode the meaning behind their patterns. It's slow work, and I'm not sure I'll live long enough to complete it. But maybe someone else will continue the research, build on what I've learned. Maybe someone smarter, more resourceful, less damaged by direct contact with forces that exist beyond the edges of sanity. Tonight, Lisa and I will probably have our final conversation about what comes next. She wants to end things on our terms, to avoid whatever fate the creatures have planned for us. It's a rational decision, and part of me agrees with her logic. But another part of me, the part that's been touched by something ancient and patient and utterly alien, knows that death won't protect us from what's coming. The bone dancers collect more than just physical remains. They harvest memories, experiences, the essential patterns that make us who we are. Dying now would just give them what they want more easily. So we'll keep fighting, keep researching, keep sharing our story with anyone willing to listen. We'll use every day we have left to prepare others for encounters with forces that exist in the spaces between rational thought and primitive terror. And if we fail, when we fail, maybe our efforts will help the next generation of survivors understand what they're facing and how to resist it. The bone dancers have been patient for millennia, but patience is a two-edged sword. If they can wait, so can we. The pattern is changing, evolving, growing more complex with each iteration, but patterns can be disrupted, broken, turned against themselves. We proved that once in a forest clearing surrounded by ancient bones and alien voices. We'll prove it again. Found among the personal effects of Robert and Lisa Johnson, reported missing from their Phoenix, Arizona home in March 2025. Neighbors reported seeing the couple's car in their driveway on March 15th, but they failed to appear for work on March 16th. Police investigation found no signs of forced entry or struggle, though the couple's backyard rock garden had been extensively disturbed with decorative stones scattered across the property in apparently random patterns. Security cameras showed no unusual activity, and no trace of the Johnsons has been found despite extensive searches. Notably, this disappearance followed by 2 weeks similar vanishings of 3 other couples across the southwestern United States, all of whom had previously reported encounters with unexplained phenomena during camping trips to remote forest locations. Federal authorities have classified these as connected cases, but maintain that no evidence supports paranormal explanations. Robert Johnson's research files, discovered on his computer, contained hundreds of photographs documenting stone and bone arrangements from dozens of locations across the western United States, along with detailed maps marking suspected entity activity zones. The files have been classified and removed from public access pending ongoing investigation.